First off, are your parents hoarders?
Yeah. My mom is actually a big hoarder. Not a dirty trash one, but in that, like, I'm pretty sure everything I've ever marked with a pen is at some place in that house. We have every VHS we ever watched growing up as children. We have a garage full of every single toy we had, every single school assignment we did. Yeah, she has a huge problem with that.
And the reason I asked that is I just assumed it because anytime I do at one of our live events, I ask this question, almost always the answer to that question. If I say, hey, your parents are hoarders, aren't they? The average person almost always says yes. And the reason they always say yes is because it's true. Most people in America are hoarders.
This podcast has bad words.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Minimalist Podcast, where we discuss what it means to live a meaningful life with less. My name is Joshua Fields Milburn. Ryan Nicodemus was going to be with us on the phone today, but he's up at Flathead Lake vacationing. But don't worry, we have a very special guest for you. Ladies and gentlemen, Destiny is in the studio. We of course got TK Coleman here.
Sending love and light to the whole world.
The disembodied voice in the background is Malabama.
Hi, everybody.
We've got the rest of our team here in the studio as well. Destiny, I was talking to Sean yesterday, our podcast producer over here, Professor Sean. He was like, hey, what do you want Destiny's lower thirds to say on the video version of the podcast? And I've never been stumped with such an easy question before. I didn't know if I should say, well, Destiny, his real name's Steven. Should we say Steven? Should we say Destiny? And also, do I call him a YouTuber? Do I call him a blue-haired progressive? But of course, he doesn't have the blue hair anymore. And we wanted to bring you on today to talk about some controversial topics. So first off, how do I even describe you?
I'd say probably YouTuber / politics streamer, I think. Yeah.
And you dive deep into a lot of philosophical discussions. That's how I stumbled across your work. Mm-hmm. And so today I think we'll talk a bit, we'll get philosophical. That's why I always have TK here, so we can wax philosophical on the podcast. But we'll also answer some pretty controversial questions. I thought we'd start in the Minimalists' wheelhouse, though. So we're going to start with a question about materialism and hoarding and how that affects our lives. By the way, we'll start with our callers. If you have a question for the show, you can give us a call, 406-219-7839, or email a voice recording to podcast@theminimalists.com. Let us know if you're a Patreon subscriber so we can prioritize your message. Big thanks to our Patreon supporters, by the way. Your support keeps our podcast and our YouTube channel 100% advertisement free because, say it with me, y'all, advertisements suck. Yes, they do. Our first question today is an anonymous voicemail.
Hi, the Minimalists. I'm in needing advice on how to handle when you have a friend who's an extreme hoarder. No, not just a hoarder, but a filthy hoarder with trash all over and massive roaches. I haven't been to her home for years. I've only been on the outside of it, which is bad enough. But she tells me daily about the hoard and the extreme problem of thousands of roaches, but almost does nothing about it. I wanted to help her even organize a room, but of course, that was before the roach problem, and all my efforts were destroyed in a short time. I try to encourage and talk, but there's no result. I'm not trying to be judgmental toward her, but I can't even hang out with her now because she carries the roaches with her in her backpack and clothing items. It has made me really uneasy and creeps me out intensely. What is a good way for me to either not feel guilty and to end some relationships that can be toxic, or how to tolerate somebody when they live this way, whether it's her or even relatives that hoard a lot and it's just so hard to be in their mess and filth? Well, hoping that you can answer this. Appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Destiny, I wanted to start with this question because I wanted to bring you into our world for a moment. People call into the show and they're often looking for observations or advice around a particular situation. And first off, are your parents hoarders?
Yeah. My mom is actually a big hoarder. Not a dirty trash one, but in that, like, I'm pretty sure everything I've ever marked with a pen is at some place in that house. We have every VHS we ever watched growing up as children. We have a garage full of every single toy we had, every single school assignment we did. Yeah, she has a huge problem with that.
And the reason I asked that is I just assumed it because anytime I do at one of our live events, I ask this question, almost always the answer to that question. If I say, hey, your parents are hoarders, aren't they? the average person almost always says yes. And the reason they always say yes is because it's true. Most people in America are hoarders. The average American household has 300,000 items in it, which would be great if it was increasing our joy. And
is that actually true?
Yeah.
I don't even believe that. That's crazy if that's true.
It's a stat from the LA Times in 2014. So my assumption is that since the minimalists have been around for a while, we probably haven't helped everyone get rid of their excess stuff.
Yet?
Yeah, I mean, because people are still calling in all the time with all this excess. And so what I'm wondering here is, when you talk to someone like this anonymous caller here, what you're talking about, or what she's talking about here, is the type of hoarder. This is stage 5 hoarder. A stage 5 hoarder often will have dead pets or roach infestations, but most people are stage 1 or stage 2 hoarders. Stage 1 hoarder means you have light clutter or 2 or more rooms. Well, that's most people, right? But stage 3 hoarder is someone who has some slight noticeable odors, maybe some dishes are piling up, or maybe there are piles of clutter strewn throughout the house. So, I wanted to bring this up though, because this person is dealing with a friend who she wants to change, but it sounds to me like that person doesn't want to change herself. Do you have any insights for a caller like this?
I think there's 2 important ends to this question. The first one is, how do you deal with the hoarder? And my answer is always really boring. I would probably Google hoarder research and find out like what are the most effective steps to alleviate somebody's hoarding problem. Sometimes we have like intuitive ways to solve things that are actually counterintuitive when you see how they play out in the long run. So for instance, I think a lot of people feel, or they used to feel, an attachment towards corporal punishment for children. And it feels like that's the right thing to do. But if you look at the research on that, it's overwhelmingly negative. So that might be a place where your intuitions lead you to a negative place. I know that for my mom, I wanted to take her out to a really nice steakhouse one night and bring in a bunch of friends and just torch everything in my house. That's what I thought. I don't know if that would be a good idea or not, because in my mind, I'm thinking like, if I can just destroy 95% of your shit, you'll come home, you'll be upset for 1 week. And then afterwards you'll go, oh my God, look at how much better my life is, that I'm not spending all my time, sorting through boxes and organizing everything. Or she could have a massive emotional breakdown and hate me and never talk to me again. I'm not actually sure what would happen. So, yeah.
And by the way, sometimes that happens because someone's going to have the emotional breakdown. If you you're essentially stealing that person's stuff at that point, which A, would be illegal, but B, that doesn't mean they have also let go of it. Forcing someone to let go of a material possession doesn't mean they let go of it emotionally, psychologically, and they may carry that with them forever. It may be a bigger burden now that it's gone.
Yeah, potentially. Because that's what I asked her. Because I'm like, why don't you, like, you've wasted so many years of your life just like sorting through boxes and like organizing the stuff that you only ever see when you're organizing. And she's like, well, these are my things that I've acquired in my life. And I, for whatever reason, when I grew up, my parents like inversely influenced every single behavior I have. So when I go to clean my apartment, I take a trash bag, and if I haven't used it for 3 months, it just gets thrown out immediately. Like I don't keep anything extra ever. So we have like a very different mindset towards, I guess, maintaining our households. There's a second part to that question, though, that I think is really important that a lot of people don't address. And you've got the hoarder, but then you also have yourself. I think it is incredibly important to establish what are fair boundaries in your life for how you engage with other people, because I've noticed that there are a lot of people. You've got like givers and takers when it comes to, you could say, psychological energy. And there are some people that are very giving of themselves to other people. And sometimes they compromise their own happiness or integrity by constantly making excuses or exceptions for other people in their lives that are very damaging to them. So I think that, there's going to be cases where there's trauma and your gut response maybe isn't good or it needs to be worked on. But I would say for most people in general, I think you should rely on your gut response. And if you're around somebody that makes you feel uncomfortable most of the time, you should probably take a step back and evaluate why that is. And if there's a compelling reason for you to stay there. I think that's really important.
And I think it's okay to love that person from a distance if you see that they're harming themselves in a way or they're going to harm you in some way by being in their presence.
Yeah, I think 2 common extremes of communication, particularly when it comes to resolving conflict, is the extreme niceties and the extreme anti-nice philosophy. I don't have to be nice. The fact that I'm telling the truth gives me permission to say it however the hell I want to say it. And then the other way is to say, I'm going to make sure that I present it in a manner that's sweet, but there is an in-between. Sometimes you got to be firm, you got to be real, you got to be authentic. And you don't have to add a punch to that in order to make the other person swallow it. And so you can make value judgments about what doesn't work for you and about what disgusts you and what you don't like without wishing out loud for that other person to spend an eternity in hell, right? And so sometimes this benefits our friends when we can look them in the eye and say things like, look, I can't do it, man. I can't meet with you for coffee. I can't go to the movies with you. I can't go for a walk with you. Why? Because even though I love the hell out of you, it actually disgusts me, man, when I see roaches crawling out of your jacket and we're sitting down trying to have lunch. It makes me want to throw up just to smell you when I'm around you. And
that's without the punch?
That's without the punch.
Jeez, okay.
That's without the punch. Hey, look, I'm telling you, man, this is love. And I would hope someone says this to me rather than just stop hanging out with me. And then I find out that they did because they thought I was gross and they were just telling everybody else about it, but they didn't tell me. What the hell, man? I thought you were my friend. And you can say to a person, I love the hell out of you, but man, it makes me want to throw up, man. It's really bad. You got roaches crawling out of your book bag. It's really bad. And this is something that you're choosing because you can do something about it. So look, we can talk on the phone as much as you need. If there's anything I can do to help you, I am here for you. But I'm sorry, man, it breaks my heart to say, I can't be getting together for lunch like this because I don't want to bring that home with me. That is, if you have someone in your life that can't handle that, at some point, you have to put responsibility on other people to be real about what they're willing to live with as well. You can't take that responsibility. And a good friend can handle that and say, all right, I respect that. Let's talk on the phone. But you might be surprised the kind of impact you can have on a person when you give them a dosage of reality, because the rest of the world, the people that don't love that person like you, they're going to give it to them in a way that's 10 times harsher than that. If you think that's harsh, wait until you meet that person who doesn't love you, who isn't heartbroken about not being able to hang out with you.
Dustin, how do you respond to that?
Yeah, I mean, I largely agree. The extreme mean can be bad. The extreme nice can be really bad too. Something that people don't, people don't see how damaging relentless compassion can be towards somebody if it's at an enabling level. Like sometimes, again, like you said, you don't have to tell somebody like, hey, screw you, like you're a disgusting, filthy piece of shit. But if you're constantly around somebody like, oh, like it's okay, it's all right, we can hang out, like it's cool or whatever, in that person's mind, they might think that, well, I've got at least a couple of friends that are okay. Maybe it's not bad as I think it is. Sometimes having somebody say like, hey, listen, you're chill and I like hanging out with you, but like, I can't do this right now because you're too far gone for me. That might be maybe, if not the wake up call, maybe something that starts setting them on a path towards improving that situation, hopefully.
Yeah, it sounds like it could potentially change their direction. And by the way, you're also going to feel good about that. You handled it in a loving way. Loving doesn't mean dragging them kicking and screaming to your point of view. And it also doesn't mean I'm just going to placate you so you feel really good about yourself.
Mm-hmm.
One last thing, none of this should be the starting point. The starting point is curiosity, because there's a difference between people's desire to hear us preach to them and people's need to be heard by someone that's willing to listen. If you preach at someone, they might be defensive. If you come to them with non-judgmental curiosity, just trying to learn, they open up their hearts and their minds to you and they give it to you. And so you can get that person on the phone. You can say, hey, I don't mean this in any kind of way, but just as your friend, man, what's up with the roaches? Yeah. Like seriously, like I can't even imagine how somebody could do it. Like, what's up with that? Is that something that you're cool with? Is that something that you like? Or is that something that you hate, but you just don't think you can change? I just want to hear from you, man.
I think we're going to talk more about curiosity here. In fact, I'm really curious about this next question Samantha from Patreon has.
Why do we need to have controversial debates? It feels like the only way people are drumming up traffic on their sites these days. I want my corner of the internet to be calm and minimal and based on positivity. Why can't we just bond together over shared interests rather than talk about the things that divide us?
And then let's couple that with Renee's question, because I thought they were so similarly linked, although they had their nuances.
I was always taught that talking about religion, politics, and money with people was taboo, and our thoughts on the topics should be kept private. Now I see it's because it's difficult to have meaningful conversations with anyone on those topics. Where do we strike the balance of healthy conversation without demonization of opposing viewpoints?
This is exactly why I've been looking forward to having this conversation. And it's because what TK was talking about a moment ago, Destiny, he was talking about curiosity and getting curious. And while I see you two being radically different people in your opinions and beliefs and ideology, dogma, one might even say, but you're both hyper curious and you don't seem to cling to a particular dogma. And when someone presents you with something, quite often, I think the average person, myself included, gets offended and brings up our own self-righteousness. And I need to now prove that I'm right and you're wrong. And when I've watched some of your debates online, Destiny, you do such a great job of getting curious about the other viewpoints. And so I know when we first put this out to our Patreon audience, several people were actually upset. Like, why do you have to have a debate about anything? And the point of this episode that I wanted to do is to show that we could talk about contentious topics, sensitive subjects in a way where it's not just decorum and we're pretending that we're being curious, but we're actually having a conversation around these things in a way that's not accusatory, it's not pointing the finger, and it's also not standing up on a pedestal and looking down at someone else and judging them for exactly how wrong they are.
What a dumb question. No, I'm just kidding. I think it's really important to recognize that in the United States, we have a huge diversity of opinion. Most people think that they have diverse friend groups because they might look a little different or come from different areas. But the reality is we tend to surround ourselves with people that are pretty similar. If you ask a liberal, like, do you have any conservative friends? A lot of them might say, yeah, I've got a couple. And it's like really conservative friends, like ones that wear MAGA hats and are pro Second Amendment. And they're like, oh, okay, well, no, I've got a conservative friend, but he didn't like Trump that much. And he's like just kind of fiscally conservative, but like he's okay with LGBT. So you don't really have a huge different group of friends, which is fine. You don't have to be friends with people that you have massive ideological differences with, but we should be able to see eye to eye, or at least have both of our eyes look at the same world as a person that has big ideological differences from us. I think that it demonstrates a great deal of maturity to, there's a quote, I should have this memorized, but it's like, it takes a great mind to entertain an idea without accepting it. Yes. Right? You should be able to understand where other people are coming from without fully agreeing with them. And you should be able to understand that people can arrive at different conclusions because of their own life experiences. And they might even be wrong, but at least you can empathize with why they're doing it. And it's not just because they're evil or demons or hateful. You know?
And most of the time when someone we say is wrong about something, it's often a preference or an opinion. Like, oh, you like onions. How could you be so wrong about that? And quite often we get self-righteous even about things that are just preferences.
Yeah, one important word to underline in the first question is we. Hey, why can't we just focus on the positive? Why do we have to be involved in the debates? If you change that we to I, then you get to do exactly what you please. You don't have to participate in any debates if it stresses you out, if you don't enjoy it. But one aspect of this diversity that Destiny talked about here is that there are some people in the world who genuinely get energy from it, right? I'm a really introverted person, and I just don't really get people who are energized and pumped up by being around a whole bunch of people. I find it exhausting. I prefer to be alone. But I understand that there are people who are energized by that which depletes me. And it's the same with debate. Many people are afraid of it. They're uncomfortable around it. If you have a party and there are two people who get to arguing, most people will treat it like, oh, hey, guys, it's okay. But those two guys are probably having an immense amount of fun that might be difficult for you to imagine. So when it comes to we have to accept that there are different people who experience debates in different ways. The other thing I'll say is one of the values of debate is not just that it helps you learn, but it actually builds your psychological muscles of resilience. So many of us live in a psychological space where we are dependent upon other people's agreement or affirmation. And when we're in a debate where we have to live in that tension of someone saying, I think you're wrong, we don't know what to do with ourselves. And if you have spaces conversationally that you never want anyone to take you into, if you've got questions that you're secretly afraid someone might ask you your opinion on, that leads to a kind of anxious life where you always have to be worried about, are they going to call me out on this belief that I have? Are they going to ask me for evidence? And when you can participate in debates as a kind of spiritual practice, if you will, it helps you develop the ability to maintain composure when you're in spaces where people may take the conversation in an unpredictable direction. And you can say, all right, cool, I can go there.
Destiny, what I heard you sort of saying there is it's possible to love someone or care about them without liking every single opinion they might have.
But like truly, Because a lot of people will say that. A lot of people will say, I can love somebody despite our differences, but for you to really test that, you have to find the really uncomfortable differences. It's easy to say, I like this guy, even though he thinks the top marginal tax bracket should be 33%. It's a lot harder to say, I love this person, even though he thinks abortion should be federally illegal throughout the entire United States. Or I love this person, even though they think that trans healthcare for children shouldn't be available. Or I love this person, even though he thinks we should send $500 billion a year to Ukraine or whatever, depending on your political affiliation. It takes a lot to accept that people can have radically different viewpoints and not be demonized. And I think that kind of what you said, there's a psychological buildup there of if you're capable of having a lot of conversations, not only do you develop a resiliency for your own ideas, you also develop the ability to kind of hopefully tolerate and understand other people as well. Although that comes with deliberate practice, because it is possible. And probably I can understand your viewers saying like, oh, why do we have to talk about debate or whatever? There is a lot of debate that's engaged in just bad faith. It's not even really debate where two people are trying to make commensurate their views with one another to disagree and agree with each other. It's just people screaming at each other, which is the opposite of everything we've said. That's not productive. It's not a way to be compassionate. It's not a way to build resiliency. Yeah.
And it's entertaining though. And I think that's why we're so drawn to it. In fact, many of the clips and things that I see you in is because you're willing to get into those sort of, and maybe even you thrive in that area because you're not bothered by those contentious arguments.
Yeah, which is frustrating because I have a reputation. People say, oh God, like this guy's just going to scream at me the whole time. Like 98% of my conversations are similar to this. They're pretty chill. Yeah. But obviously the things that go the most viral are me and another guy screaming at each other about who's the biggest cuck or who's like the dumbest dumbass or whatever. Like that's just, because that's usually what garners views and what gets more attention. But
yeah, that's right. I'm going to skip Michelle's question because I want to do something. Usually we do something called the lightning round where we answer questions. We have a minute to give a short, shareable, pithy response. We call them minimal maxims. But today, since we have Destiny and we have TK here, TK and Destiny, I think we'll be able to debate a few things. I picked some questions I thought the two of you would disagree about, and I think we'll start there. So we have a question here and we'll give you 3 minutes each on this, and then I'll add some follow-up questions on top of it. First question from Daniel on Instagram.
Is there an objective morality, or is morality relative? Must you believe in God to believe in morality?
Destiny, let's start with you on this. So, do you believe in an objective morality?
Yeah, let me just solve ethics right now for you.
By the way, you got 60 seconds? Oh my gosh.
Well, no, he gave me 3 minutes to solve ethics. Thank you. Let me tell you, as a YouTube idiot, Okay, so my personal view on this is my issue with saying there is an objective moral truth is that it raises the question of objective moral facts. And when I think of an objective moral fact, what I'm thinking of is there any way for us to perceive a moral fact? And there doesn't seem to be a way to do that. If one person kills somebody else, there are physical properties that my eyes, my ears, I can go and touch that I can observe. And if somebody else disagrees with me over something, we can reconcile that based on similar sense data. We all have the same eyes, we all have the same ears. More or less, we regard things similarly. But when it comes to observing a moral fact, that murder was wrong, versus this guy saying that murder was justified, well, we have to get into it's like a cognitive exercise, a rational exercise of like, well, let's have an argument over this or that, which I don't think is similar for anything else. So I don't believe that there are objective moral facts. I don't... If you're looking for like an actual position of mine, I would be a moral anti-realist because I don't believe that morals are real. And I probably fall on a side called non-cognitivism, where I think that when you're expressing a moral statement, you're really just expressing a personal preference. So if somebody says murder is wrong, what you're really saying is murder, boo. I don't like that, basically. And I think that, but I think that the reason why we've kind of to take it a step further, my arrogance, my hubris, the reason why we fooled ourselves into thinking there are objective moral properties is because we all share very similar preferences as humans. We all want to be respected, our personal bodily autonomy. We want to be happy. We want to be healthy. We want to have families. And from this, I think we all have similar non-cognitivist views on these like moral propositions. Like, I don't want to be murdered. Boo, that is bad. Don't steal from me. Boo, that is bad. We'd like to take it one step further and say, well, objectively, these are moral truths of the fabric of the universe. But in reality, I think we all just have a similar set of preferences that we probably ought to respect because it helps us maximize our own experiences on this planet.
Can I push back on that? Or?
Please do.
Yeah. So, okay, you can see that the reason we're inclined to believe that moral values are objective is that we all have this similar set of preferences. Could that not be described as a kind of universality of perception that's analogous to us being able to see the same thing with our eyes?
I think that you can make that argument for some things, that are very basic. So should we torture and murder people? No. Well, we all agree on that. Don't we observe that the same way we observe an apple falling off a tree? But then I ask a question like, should homosexual relationships be allowed in public? It's a lot harder for two people that disagree to have a very clear perception of what's right or wrong, because then we start to get very societally outcome oriented. Because here we can look at some objective facts. Let's say the guy that's pro-gay relationship says, look, I've ran the math and society is actually better objectively in every conceivable metric when we have gay relationships. The other guy can go, I don't care. You're not measuring the spiritual decay that's occurring when we allow for those relationships. You're not measuring how it's changing the way that we view relationships, and it's abusing, either gifts given from God or the teleology of like what human bodies are designed to do. Right? And I don't know how you ever resolve that.
So we can make a distinction between the existence of moral facts and the amount of moral facts that there are, right? So it may be the case that there are only about 5 moral facts, and that's incredibly boring. It doesn't solve a lot of very important debates. But if that's true, that would mean that objective moral values exist. It would also mean that not everything is a matter of objective morality. Some things are a matter of preference. Some things are a matter of taste. And most moral realists actually do believe that, right? That, I like chocolate ice cream, you like vanilla ice cream. Who's right? Well, there is no objective moral fact about that, right? So objective moral facts can coexist with a world where not everything is reducible to an objective moral fact. What would be your response to that?
I guess then I would dig deeper into like, how do we observe like a moral fact? Is it literally just are we relying on our sense of disgust or...
So one could argue that something along the lines of moral intuition would be an organ of perception. So in the same way that physically you and I can see that same guy sitting there, that intuitively we're perceiving that same thing, namely the same set of preferences that you mentioned, like torturing innocent babies for spectator sport. That's morally wrong. We all seem to agree on that. So that could be an argument that we're seeing with some sort of intuition. We're picking up on that.
So the interesting question I have there is, let's say I can shape the intuitions of society. If I do this with physics, at some point, we're going to hit an uncomfortable wall where it's like, listen, you guys can think this, but the math doesn't work. What do you do when you've got a society full of people that have a moral intuition that might be, I wouldn't believe this is even a possible phrase, but like wrong moral intuitions, right? So for instance, you got a group full of people cheering and chanting when a witch is being drowned or burned at the stake. For all of them to have that intuition that some good activity is happening there, that some witch or some, demon is being burned. Do you tell those people, I'm sorry that your moral analysis here is wrong, your intuition is wrong? How do you, basically at the final level, this is where all these conversations go back to me, and I'm guessing the answer would be is, I can resolve a dispute between any type of physics, chemistry, mathematics, whatever question. I don't know how to resolve disputes of moral fact.
So I don't think you can resolve the disputes over the physical things. We can create those same epistemic difficulties with the physical world if you give me the powers of technology to manipulate people's perception of physical reality. What if through the use of holographic technology? What if I can develop some kind of mind control technology and I can actually make people see a monster when they don't see that? I can make people see an alien when there's no alien there. I've created the same set of epistemic difficulties, but it doesn't negate the existence of an objective physical reality. It just means there are really complicated scenarios where we may not have any easy answers for knowing what's real and what's not. And so belief in objective moral values doesn't have to mean all moral questions can be easily answered.
And to answer the second part of that question then, TK, does it require a belief in God, or must God exist then for there to be an objective morality?
So as a believer in God, no, it doesn't, because throughout the history of Western analytic philosophy, there have been a lot of thinkers who subscribe to moral realism, but have grounded it apart from theism. So there are certain beliefs, whether it's the Randian objectivist view, there's sort of like the deontological ethical view, and then there are some people who they anchor it in the empirical evidence for human flourishing. Whether or not those arguments are good, that's up for debate, but it is a fact historically that there are lots of moral realists who are not also theists and who don't ground it in theism. So it wouldn't suffice to say, oh, you believe in objective moral values? Oh, you must believe in God. That's not true for a lot of people out there.
Yeah, that's true. He brings up Rand, Kant, Sam Harris, I think, were the references. Yeah, you can have objective morality. Well, I mean, I would say you can't, but other people feel like they found it even without a God figure being necessary.
Well, speaking of Rand, let's move on to the next question here. This one is from Halo on TikTok.
Is taxation theft? Can you debate libertarianism and anarcho-capitalism?
Well, so it seems to me that once upon a time, Destiny, you were sympathetic to this worldview, and then your views have evolved over time.
Yeah, I was my most libertarian when I was at my lowest point in life, right before I got into streaming. I was a big Ron Paul supporter and everything. Is taxation theft? I feel like when we live in a society, there are a set of agreements that we have with each other that in order to take advantage of all the good things we get from society, there are some implicit agreements that we've made for how to conduct ourselves in society. So I don't, violate other people's autonomous expectations. I don't punch people in the street. I don't walk around naked. I don't litter, pollute, destroy. There are a whole bunch of agreements that, I have, even in my own property. I'm not allowed to discharge a firearm inside my house. I'm not allowed to set my house on fire and walk away, even though I own it. These are all things that we've kind of agreed because we've created a society that creates more than the sum of our parts, right? Like everybody coming together can create something that's better than just everybody working independently. And the only way for that to work is there has to be a necessary transaction between all those people in society. And I consider taxation to be one of those transactions. So, is taxation theft? I mean, taxation is theft as much as it's a restriction on my freedom not to, run down the street naked, essentially.
Oh man, totally disagree. So first, I define theft as the use of violence or the threat thereof to forcibly extract something from another party. And I think we have to make a distinction between two very different questions. Question number one, is taxation theft? I don't know how it couldn't be. So I would love to hear how you would define theft to make it not so. But the second question is, are there morally justifiable circumstances under which theft would be okay? So I believe that a lie is a lie, but I think there are some circumstances where perhaps you could argue it would be a morally good thing for you to lie in this particular instance. I'm open to that argument big time. And I think we have to do the same thing with theft. I think my decision to not run down the street naked is of a very different order than my decision to cooperate with the government when they say pay your taxes or there's going to be some serious consequences to bear. I think the argument you just gave could also be used to justify respecting the mafia. If I'm walking through a gang-infested neighborhood and there's a bunch of guys looking at me, there's a rule that I will play by. It's called don't start none, won't be none. I'm not going to look at those guys. I'm not going to say anything that might provoke those guys to violence. I'm going to do the smart thing and behave in the way that gives me the best chance of living. However, if I happen to look at a guy and say, what you looking at, fool? That would be a very stupid thing to do, but it wouldn't change the fact that if he pulled out a gun and shot me in the head, that would be murder. Would it have been dumb of me to provoke him? Absolutely. Would a smarter version of me mind my own business? Absolutely. But what he does in the hypothetical scenario is murder. And the only question to ask is, was he justified in that act of murder?
I guess here's a question. Let's say you've got 10 cows, and let's say that every Friday, a guy comes along and he milks 2 of those cows. You don't want him to, it's against your consent. He milks 2 of those cows. He takes the milk. Would you consider that theft?
Do I own the cows?
Yeah.
I own the cows.
Yeah.
Some guy comes and milk the cows without my consent.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would consider that theft.
Okay. Let's say that he milks the cows, but he leaves you an above fair market exchange for what you could have sold the milk for. Is it still theft?
I would consider it theft, but done so in a way that would incline some people, not me, to be more okay with it.
I think that when I think of taxation, I think of it more like the latter, where it's not straight theft because somebody's not taking your money in exchange for nothing. There is an exchange there, and that exchange is the massive society that we're able to sustain and live in. So I think that some people might say that it's theft because something is being taken from me without my consent, but I would argue that the existence of society and the consumption of that society's said resources necessitate that sort of exchange. So I'm not going to accuse, a man next to me stealing the oxygen by breathing, right? Because we all have to live here and share it. I think I would say the same for taxation in the United States. I guess under some definitions, we could call it theft, but I think that theft generally implies is one, it's completely non-consensual, which I guess some libertarians would argue taxation is, but 2, there's usually something for nothing. Usually somebody's taking something, you're not getting anything back for it. And I think that once you have that exchange of the societal upkeep there, I think it fundamentally alters the way that you view the question.
I think we have to make a distinction between what a thing is and my psychological proclivity to be okay with what you are doing to me under certain conditions. There are conditions where you can bribe me into being okay with doing something wrong to me, right? In this case, oxygen, which was an example you use, that's something that none of us own. On the other hand, if you come into my home and you take an oxygen tank that I have, I do own that, and that would be a clear instance of theft. If I take $20 and go to the coffee shop and bring you a cup of coffee back, that's not going to stop you from being mad about the fact that I stole your $20 just because I bought you a $2 cup of coffee. And so I think the argument you're making is an argument that says, look, when you consider the greater good, that would make theft morally justifiable. I don't think it makes it something other than theft. But, as far as it being morally justifiable, the basis for the societal good that you're referring to, it starts with the wealth that's extracted from people. In other words, the entity that is taking this wealth and redistributing it doesn't create any value of its own. It can only create value by first taking it. So I think what's happening there is the broken window fallacy.
If I could ask, I'm curious, do you think that chores that children do for their parents, would you consider that theft?
No, I don't.
How not, though? You're essentially milking them for free labor, not paying them a fair wage.
So you said something earlier about parental discipline. And so we may agree here on an area where you're not participating, or where you're not anticipating. I don't believe in coercive parenting, and I don't believe in violent parenting. So I don't believe that as a parent, you have the moral right to just make your child do anything that you want them to do, irrespective of the consideration of their dignity and their freedoms and their rights and so on. And surprisingly, that's a very controversial position. But I don't think all ways of asking your children to do chores are equal in the same way that I think it's right to discipline your kid. I don't think it's cool or right to physically do that.
Sure. But let's say that they mow the lawn once a week, they take the trash out, 2 or 3 times a week. If I were to pay a house cleaner to do it, this might be a couple $100 a week, but I give my child a $10 a week allowance. Is there a theft that's occurring there?
No, I don't believe that there's a theft that's occurring there as long as what's being done is voluntary.
But how voluntary is a child doing chores for the parent?
So for instance, first, we can't define what's voluntary by the internal emotional experience that you're having. Because even you and I as adults, we do a lot of very valuable things we're choosing to do. And inside, we have moments where we're like, I do not want to do this. That doesn't mean we're free. That just means we're human beings. And sometimes we have moods where we don't like what we're doing, but we recognize the value of it. When I go home to Chicago, if my dad says, hey, son, get me a glass of water, he knows and I know that I can say, no, Dad, I'm not getting you anything. And if I do that, he does not have the right to put his hands on my body, and he won't do that. It may alter our relationship in a negative way for me to treat him like that, but what's going to happen in the end is I won't do the thing that I don't want to do. But if he says, get me a glass of water, I'm going to go do it, even if I don't feel like it. Why? Because it's part of our relationship for me to do it. So And I guess I'm having trouble seeing where this maps over to the government.
I guess my summary of it, because we can go back and forth this for a long time. Yeah. My summary of it, my feelings are that when we look at chores that children do for parents, is it theft? And I mean, in a way, you're kind of stealing labor from them. You're not really compensating them a fair market wage.
But wait, why is it? Are you imagining a context where the parent is threatening the child and saying,
you have to do your chores or else you lose privileges.
Yeah, but privileges versus rights, that's a key distinction. If you are my child and I'm raising you, it's not a privilege for me to feed you. That's a moral
No, but it might
obligation.
be a privilege for me to have access to the internet, and even the government can't take that away if they give me a ticket unless they put me in jail or something, right?
Yeah. So if I say to you as a child, hey, you don't want to clean up your room? All right, I'm not going to be violent with you, but at the same time, sitting around and playing the Xbox every day that I pay for, that's not happening. That would be my right as a child to revoke privileges in response to things that my child is doing that disrespect certain considerations that govern the home. Absolutely.
Yeah, but you have the power.
But we're talking privileges, not rights.
Yeah, I know, but the power imbalance there it makes it very difficult for the child to I can't take away any of your privileges because you're an adult and you can go and do what you want. I know that child is functionally my slave. He can't, unless he becomes emancipated in the courts, he can't escape my household. He's not allowed to work and get a job. His existence essentially lives under the thumb of my rule. So if I say, listen, you're going to mow the lawn, or no cell phone, no computer, no TV, you're going to come home, you're going to do your homework, and you're going to stare at a wall for 4 hours, and then you're going to go to sleep.
Yeah. So, but you're asking me how I feel about that morally. If, as a parent, you choose to threaten your child and say, "Hey, if you don't mow the lawn, I'm going to make your life as difficult as I can possibly making it by walking a fine line where I literally deprive you of everything that you don't have legal access to," I think you're a total jerk if you do that as a parent. Sure. And I think that's objectively moral wrong. Sure. Of course, I would have to defend that notion. So this is why I can't map it over with the government, because I do have a philosophy that allows me to criticize parents for the way they treat their children.
I guess the thing that, just to summarize my point of view, the thing that I was saying is that, like, I view chores in a similar way as taxation, where chores are a burden that the parents place on the child. And in a way, it's not necessarily fair because the child's not being compensated a fair market wage for it. But there's like an agreement that, like, it builds discipline. It does all of these external beneficial things for children to do chores, such that that one-to-one wage compensation might not necessarily need to happen. The same way that, like, when you pay tax to the government, we're building a society that wouldn't be able to exist in any other form without taxation. So even though tax is being drawn from us, there are all of these external beneficial factors that are a positive for it. That was the comparison I was going to make. Yeah.
One quick important distinction, and I know we're not going to cover everything there is to.
We can argue for 3 hours on this.
Sorry, go ahead. When it comes to the parent and the child, all of the wealth that child has access to was created by the parent independently of the child's contribution.
That's true.
Not only is it true, but the existence of the child actually takes away from some of the wealth that it has access to as a result of what the parent has created. You're living in a house.
As a parent, I can attest to that.
You're living in a house that you don't pay bills for, right? You are eating food that you didn't pay for and that you didn't prepare. So all of the wealth that's available to the child is created by the parent independently of the child. In your case, where you're talking about this flourishing society that the government makes, there is not a single aspect of that is provided by the government that is not financed by creative individuals who create value independently of the government. In other words, everything that the government gives to you, it has to have the wealth to give it. And in order to get that wealth, it takes it from you and from others. And that's a very critical distinction between the parent and child relationship.
Destiny, at what point did your viewpoint bifurcate from TK's? Because it sounds to me like at some point in your nadir of living, you were at a part where you really sympathize with this worldview, but then you've become privy to new information, new ideas. What happened?
Something that's very difficult for poor people to understand is marginal utility. The idea that the next thing isn't as good as the thing that came before it. When I started to earn more money, when I got into streaming, and then especially when I had a son, and I saw how much different my life was when I got the next 10,000, the next 100,000, whatever dollars of income, I started to realize how unimaginably different life was for wealthy people versus for poor people. When I was at my poorest point, my kind of thought process was, if I keep working hard, as long as I work hard, I can do whatever. I just need to keep pushing through, pull myself up, whatever, blah, blah, blah. That was kind of my thought process. I was a big worker, worked 13-day stretches every time at my little carpet cleaning job, like for horrible pay, and I'm very libertarian, blah, blah, blah. And then once I started to make more money, and I'm like, I can actually get a flat tire and it doesn't destroy my life. I can get a speeding ticket and who cares? Or I can have a court case and I can pay for a lawyer and make it go away. Or I can put my kid in the nicest school in my entire city. And like, kids have to go home from school. They have their own personal iPads when they're like 2, or I'm sorry, not 2, when they're in like 2nd grade, which is crazy to me. I start to see the differences in life between the wealthy and the non-wealthy. And I'm like, listen, if the government wants to take or scrape the top 10, 20, 30, 40% of my income, or in California here, 50% of your income, depending on how brutal the state taxes are for your particular bracket, my argument does not apply to California. Actually, fuck this state, okay? Jesus. My argument doesn't apply to California, okay? I moved out of this taxed hellhole, all right? But in general, I'm like, listen, if I can pay a little bit more to alleviate some of the suffering or some of the hardships that some of these people experience, no amount of taking, even if you take 60% of my income, my life's not going to meaningfully change at all. But for a person earning $20,000 a year, a $2,000 or $3,200 tax credit for a child, that's a game changer. That's a huge amount of money that can make a difference in that person's life. So that's generally how I view it. It's a marginal utility thing. If I've got 10 people, one guy has $1 million and the other 9 have 10,000. If I take $300,000 from the millionaire, his enjoyment of life is going to be hardly impacted. And if I spread that $300,000 out to the other 9 people, their enjoyment of life is going to be dramatically improved. that's kind of how I view taxation and government structures. Yeah.
I think I agree with a lot of that. Where I have a problem is I remember when I was back in the corporate world, I left in 2011 and I was making a couple $100,000 a year, which was great in Dayton, Ohio. And I was in my late 20s, around 30 years old. And that first year I made $23,000 and I was more financially free that year because I had radically simplified my life. Now, I'm not saying that everyone should go out now and live on $23,000, but I did have greater freedom and had very little to do with income. It had much more to do with the idea that I no longer needed the things I thought I needed before. Can you maybe talk about that a bit? Yeah,
that's a whole other area. I'm so glad I didn't fall in this trap. I don't know why, but first of all, how wealthy you feel is largely a function of how much you spend, not how much you make. You can make a lot of money and live like a brokey, okay? Yeah. Depending on how stupid you are with acquiring liability after liability after liability. For me, coming from a family that had a lot of issues with money to me exemplifies freedom. If I total my car, I can buy a new one in cash. I drive a $40,000 car. I don't have a $250,000. I don't have a Bugatti or whatever, right? I have my car. I can travel anytime I want. If I want to quit working, I can quit working. To me, money is the freedom to do things. For a lot of people, and for a variety of reasons, capitalist, consumerist, advertising, whatever, money is a means to exemplify status. And status is acquired through material possessions. And once you're on the treadmill of that rat race, there is no amount of money that you can make $1 million a year and easily blow through that if you're just trying to buy things to show status to other people. So yeah, I could totally believe somebody going from making $200,000 a year to not feeling as comfortable to making $23,000, $30,000 a year and being like, you know what? I don't even think I need a car. I like jeans and t-shirts. I have a computer I play games on, and I go out, like maybe drinking every Friday night or something, right? And you could like live a fun, free life doing that. But yeah, the people that spend money just buying like highly depreciating material things or acquiring liabilities. People do this, buying cars, payday, whatever, furniture and all this stuff. Yeah, it's just a really bad approach to money, I think. Going into tremendous amounts of debt. I heard you talk about this recently. When I was prepping for this episode, you were talking about your parents having a tremendous amount of debt. Yeah, they're I'm sure you guys have used the term lifestyle creep, right? Yeah, absolutely. We call it lifestyle inflammation. Yeah, they are very, very, very big on that, to where they can earn a lot of money, but they always have to buy new things. If you compare me to every other member of my family, I look like the poorest person in my family, just because of how much stuff everybody likes to buy, and the big houses and all the cars and the, yeah. And was that your reaction to them? Were you sort of thumbing your nose at them, or were you just so disgusted by the hedonic treadmill that they were on that you decided to hop off? I think disgusted is a strong word. Like, I understand the thought process for a lot of people. And a lot of it is kind of like a victim of what you've been told or advertised to in society. That half of my family, my mom, her sister, come from Cuba. And when they moved and they came to the United States, the idea is that in the United States, you can achieve unimaginable things. There's an unimaginable amount of wealth here, nice houses, there's cars, freedom, things you can buy, all these things you can do. And I think that sometimes people put the cart before the horse, whereas those other things, houses and cars, are supposed to represent like a freedom for you. And that's the end goal. Instead, they fixate on the things themselves in order to assume that at some point that freedom is going to show up. But those things are like, those things should be like a byproduct of the freedom that you're kind of trying to strive for, not the end results themselves, because the freedom won't come as a byproduct. Yeah, if that makes sense. TK, before we take a break, I'm going to tune into one more question here. This one is from Alberto.
We're done on taxation?
From X.
Do you have any controversial dating advice?
Destiny, do you have any controversial dating advice? And I wanted to have this question here up front before we go to the break, because I think you and TK have radically different worldviews, although he and I really don't talk about this. I too, I'm in a marriage. It's an open marriage. And so... Jesus. And actually, TK's in a relationship with Jesus. So, no, he's in a Catholic marriage, a long-term Catholic marriage. And so I think we bifurcate pretty significantly here. Although I've always felt respected by TK and vice versa. Yeah. But do you have any dating advice for folks? Dating advice or controversial dating feelings? Because those are two very different things. Let's do both. Yeah. You start with whichever one you want.
Both of them need to be controversial, though.
The first controversial thing I say is you're not dating until you live with somebody. Up until then, you're talking, or you can be exclusive or whatever you want to call it. But until you actually share a household with somebody, you have no idea what that person is like or how you get along with them, which is probably going to conflict maybe a lot with the Catholic viewpoint on that. But,
No, I don't think so. I think it conflicts more with my viewpoint. My
Really?
wife and I live apart half the time.
oh my goodness.
Yeah, right. And because we tried the whole living together thing, and it's awesome. I just am not good to live with. I'm really difficult to live
I'll
with.
amend that actually. If you can make a relationship, because I can't do long distance ever.
Yeah.
But if you can make a relationship where you don't live together, well, then maybe that's the next step of my advice. But in a way, I think it also, in a roundabout way, kind of proves my point, and that you can really love somebody and you get along in a lot of ways, but the living together might not work.
Yes.
And it's really scary for people to make really big commitments until they've tested that part of their relationship. I would say sexually is, of course, too. You should have some sort of sexual compatibility before you make a big commitment to a long-term relationship as well. But the living together one is one that usually people get really upset at me for saying. So yeah.
But what about in terms of like compatibility? I think that's the place where we go awry. You know, Christopher Ryan talks about how there are three sort of, a relationship is a three-legged table, and you could love someone, you lust after them, so chemistry. But then there's compatibility, which I would say do you really like them? Because it's possible to have intense chemistry with someone. It's also possible to love someone, if you go by my definition of loving someone, to see them for who they are without trying to change them, manipulate them, coerce them, persuade them. But there's this other part where we're just fundamentally incompatible for whatever reason. Sometimes it's sort of surface level values like, oh, you voted for someone in the last election who I don't like. Okay, screw you. But other things, you just might not be compatible long term.
I'm a big chemistry guy. I don't know, which is really annoying because like in every other point of my life, I'm going to be like the most discreetly autistic person for measuring any possible thing I do. But when it comes to relationships, I'm just very big on chemistry. There are some people that for whatever reason, the gravity and the attraction is there. And that's probably not enough for a relationship. But that for me, that's like the foundational building block. That has to be there. I have to want to see you and hug you and love you and be close to you. And if that's not there, we don't have a real relationship. From there, things like hobbies and shared interest, I feel like I've heard so many different people in long-term relationships that have diametrically opposed views on that. I know one couple where he told me that the key to his relationship was when they both integrated each other heavily into a lot of different areas of their lives, because it allowed them to see each other, work with each other, build with each other, and that was really great. I've had another person that said, this couple was, I think, in their 50s or 60s, and the wife told me, I love my husband. He is not my best friend. And she had a lot of friends, and she went out, she played bingo, she did all that, and she had her husband, and he went out and he did his things, and watching him did that. And they loved each other, and they came together at the end of the day, and they shared like household chores and everything. But they had kind of some overlapping group of friends, but they have very different lives, and that worked really well for them.
Sure.
So this would be a question where I'd probably Google like what are the highest predictors of long-term relationship and find out. But just from what I've heard anecdotally, it seems like based on how you view your life and how relationships should be for you, you can get wildly different answers that are kind of personalized to the individual.
I really like this last point you made, though, because it gets to the heart of like some Hollywood depictions of romantic love where it's this all-consuming thing. And this is supported by the feelings we get during the honeymoon phase, right?
That's the chemistry part.
You are my everything.
Yeah.
But in order for a relationship to be healthy, you absolutely have to have something that is life-giving outside of that relationship. Because when you look to your partner to be the end-all, be-all of your existence, that's not only terribly unfair to them and something that they could never look up to, but you deprive your relationship of that new, fresh energy that you can only get by engaging the world in interesting ways on your own, having some friends and some adventures that you explore and kick it with, and then bringing that energy back into your home, back into your relationship. It's sort of like imagine having one outlet that's plugged into a wall, or having one plug that's plugged into an outlet, another one that's plugged into an outlet, and then these two plugs meet each other and they go, oh my gosh, you're just so amazing. I want to plug into you. And they do that, and it feels really amazing at first. But then after a while, you just have this recycled old energy, and both of them are sitting around going, what happened to our magic? Well, the reason you had a magic is because you each were plugged into the world in very interesting ways. And now you're only plugged into each other and you're recycling old energy. Unplug for a little bit and plug into the world in interesting ways, and then come back together and delight in that together.
Yeah, there's a certain dynamic what you're talking about here. And for some people, like Nicodemus, he's our co-host, co-founder of The Minimalists. He and his wife seem to spend 98% of their time together. And they're just like, and they're super extroverts, and they really, but even they require the other 2% of the time to be apart to create that chemistry. Yeah. And Destiny, I think what we're talking about here, and I don't know that we're even disagreeing, when we say that there are three main components to relationship, it's the like, the lust, and the love. The lust part is the chemistry part, and that is an important part. But as you, I think, alluded to, you can't sustain a relationship on chemistry alone.
Yeah, probably not. There has to be, for me, I guess if I was to think of the like part, it'd probably be sharing like hobbies and interests, so things you can do together to have fun. In my mind, the love part is almost always going to be defined by some level of self-sacrifice. This is something that I do that I really don't want to do, but I'll do it because I love you and I respect you, and I'll even put myself out for it. And those two parts are probably really important are not really important, probably essential to maintaining a healthy relationship too. Yeah.
We got so many more questions here, some controversial debate topics for the Minimalist Private Podcast: abortion, big pharma, transgenderism, and LGBTQ rights, increasing the minimum wage, or maybe TK will say decreasing the minimum wage. I don't know. The death penalty, video games, politics, book banning, gun rights, problems with the so-called red pill community, fat shaming versus body positivity, and we have a former employee who's going to call out the minimalists. All that. We're trying to get to as many of those as we can, plus much more of less. But before we get to that, Malabam, what do you got for us?
Here's a minimalist insight from one of our listeners.
Hi guys, this is Christy in Chicago, Illinois. I'm a Patreon subscriber, and I wanted to call in with some thoughts for Natant in episode 403, who was struggling with both the decision of whether to become a parent and also whether there was a way to make this decision without sacrificing his relationship with his partner, who very much does not want to be a parent. There are so many ways that you could provide the act of parenting without becoming a parent. You could take a proactive interest in the lives of the children of your friends and family if there's anyone you have that kind of close relationship with. You and your partner could adopt a pet. There are so many who desperately need good homes. There are also thousands of already existing children in the world who could very much use a positive adult influence. Become a big brother or volunteer as an aide in an understaffed school or become a tutor or a mentor. If your partner was open to the idea, perhaps one day you could have a discussion about fostering. In most places, the foster system is a dismal place to be, and a home of light and love would be such a blessing. If you want to exercise compassion, you can do volunteer work with the homeless or struggling returning veterans or volunteer in an animal shelter. There are so many ways to spread love in the world without procreating, if that is at the core of what you feel you're looking to express. And with many of these options, you could choose what speaks to your heart and soul without your partner being obliged to participate. I hope perhaps this might spark some useful, non-binary discussions for you and your partner, and I wish you both the very best.
All right, y'all, real quick for right here, right now, this is our little segment where we talk about one thing that's going on in the life of the minimalist, the first Friday of every month over on Patreon, patreon.com/the minimalists. We do the Friday afternoon minimalist Zooms. It's a Zoom call with the minimalists, me and TK and Ryan Nicodemus. We also bring in some guests, and the rest of our team is there as well participating. You get to have a Zoom call with us. We can talk about whatever you want to talk about. And speaking of Patreon, we'll see you over there for the full 3-hour maximal edition of episode 409 with Destiny. We were just talking during the break here, and Danny was telling me that he avoids these conversations about these controversial topics because, well, it makes people pretty angry. And when I see people getting contentious and angry, I sort of want to become that Homer Simpson meme where he's just backing into the bushes slowly. But Danny, you were saying that you had a totally different experience on the private podcast.
Yeah, like you said, when these conversations come up, whether I'm at a family dinner or with a group of friends or with two groups of friends kind of merging in an event, and these conversations come up, these topics come up, I am Homer Simpson. I kind of back away, go to the restroom. I don't want to get fired up. I don't want to get angry. I don't want my views of people to change. I don't want times to be ruined. And so when these conversations were being had, I was thoroughly surprised at my reaction. I was very entertained, and I was learning as these guys were discussing different views. And yeah, I was entertained. I've learned a lot.
Yeah, so was I. I'll say not only was I entertained by it, which is not the point of doing this, but we were trying to show that we can have discussions. At the very end of the private podcast, I said, hey, this is a conversation about topics that we never talk about on this podcast. And it got contentious at parts, but you wouldn't know it because no one was getting ready to throw their pen or their paper or a telephone at someone else. But TK and Destiny disagreed about some things that I didn't think they were going to disagree about. And they actually agreed about some things I was certain they were going to disagree about. And that's what happens when you allow nuance into the conversation.
Absolutely. And contentiousness doesn't have to mean conflict at the level of our relationship. My wife and I were playing a Sherlock Holmes game the other night where we're trying to solve a crime and we had different theories about what happened and we were getting contentious, and we were raising our voice like, no, that is not what happened. This is a guy. No, you're totally off base. You're completely wrong. But we were able to have a good time after we finished that game that night and enjoyed ourselves. And so just because you disagree and you disagree passionately doesn't mean that you can't be at peace. And so anyway, it's really cool to hear that from Danny. With a lot of these types of discussions, what's challenging for me is that what I'm going to tell you about my worldview differs when you ask me directly about my opinion than what I'm going to tell you if we're just relating to each other in everyday life. There are some things that I think are unhealthy, but that doesn't mean I feel the need to initiate a discussion with you about what's unhealthy. And so this was an opportunity for me to talk about some things that I don't say in the context of everyday life because there are better ways to start a conversation with people. But here I was put in a position where I'm being asked very direct things, and that was kind of fun. And it was challenging for me.
Yeah.
Destiny is a great sparring partner for exploring ideas, and I felt like I learned a lot, and I enjoyed it. I hope he did too. He seemed like he did.
I felt great being a fly on the wall. It's the first podcast we've done in 409 episodes where I felt out of my depth with respect to these questions. Part of that is because I don't have a belief or an opinion, a solidified opinion around these things. So I lean on people like you two to inform me, not to hand me my belief or to hand me your opinion and say, here, you hold this, but I'm interested to think about the way that you think about these things. And so that if I'm ever confronted with one of these topics, I have the sort of weaponry, the arsenal to be able to think critically. If I were to retitle this episode, it'd probably be something like The Art of Conversation, specifically on the private podcast, because we went deep and had conversations about things that most of the time would break out into arguments, people getting mad, people walking out of the room, people feeling like they need to prove their point, hammer it home sufficiently so they restate their argument 7 different ways, but it's the same thing. And no listening goes on. And so maybe the art of conversation is also the art of listening. I found that the three of us were listening to each other. We weren't willing to just judge someone based on a different point of view. You can check that out at Patreon, patreon.com/The Minimalist to subscribe and get your personal link, or you can just click the link down in the description. You'll subscribe to our weekly Maximal episodes so they can play in your favorite podcast app. So Apple Podcasts, Feedly, Overcast, et cetera, et cetera. You'll also gain access to all of our podcast archives. We've been doing this since 2015. So the podcast, that is, since 2015, all the way back to episode 001. And if you're still on the fence, Patreon is now offering free trials. You want to try it out for a week just for this episode alone. So patreon.com/The Minimalist. Big thanks to Destiny for joining us today. You can check him out on his YouTube channel, which we'll put a link to in the show notes. Also, his website is destiny.gg. We'll also put a link to his social media handles in the show notes. That's our minimal episode for today. If you leave here with just one message, let it be this: love people and use things, because the opposite never works. Thanks for listening, y'all.
We'll see you next time.
Much love, everyone.
Every little thing you think that you need, every little thing you think that you need, every little thing that's just feeding your greed. Oh, I bet that you'd be fine without it.